Hi, everybody. It's Jay, and I am back in the booth with you for another sneak peek video preview for this week's new release here on Say with Jay. Our new release this week is Down the Dirt Road. It's book number 3 in Jessie Gussman's Raspberry Ridge Sweet Beach romance series. And I've been telling you guys how fantastic this series is. This book absolutely adds to that assessment. It is a wonderful opposites attract love story, and in my opinion at least anyway, it's got a thread, a little bit, a thin layer of enemies to lovers to it as well. But what if the enemies don't know they're enemies? Or maybe the enemies don't know why they're enemies? You'll see what I mean in a bit, and I've got more about that and the story and a live preview reading for you in just a minute. But first, it's time for another segment of Cooking with Jay. For anybody who doesn't know, Jessie has been adding recipes or dishes to her books, and we thought it might be fun for me to make those dishes for you. Well, that's what we're going to do here today, and we're going to combine two, well, I know one is a southern delicacy. The other may be a little bit more widespread. But we're going to be making shrimp and grits dressing casserole. For people outside of the southern United States, you may not even know what grits are. In brief, grits are roughly ground corn, not quite cornmeal, but a little rougher ground than that. And they're cooked similar to oatmeal, and to a similar consistency. It's normally a breakfast dish. It's usually served with salt and pepper and butter, maybe cheese. Some people throw bacon in theirs, bits of bacon bits, whatever you like. Well, sometime, somewhere, somebody came up with the idea of adding shrimp to it, some seafood seasoning, and making a dinner entree out of it. Now, I've never really cared much for shrimp and grits. I mean, the taste is great, but for me, for dinner, the problem is that shrimp and grits can still have the consistency of grits. In other words, kind of, well, not soupy, but it's served in a bowl, and it's just not something that usually appeals to me for dinner. Not at a seafood place, for sure. But then, what if we were to add the second half, and that is dressing? Now, again, I think that's very common in the South around the holidays, around Thanksgiving and Christmas, instead of stuffing. But that may be something that's more widespread or better known around the country. But what if you combine those two things? Make shrimp and grits have the consistency of dressing. That is what this dish does, and let me tell you, it is fantastic. And that's what I'm going to make for you here today. So, without further ado, let's get started. And as always, don't worry about trying to capture the ingredients or the directions in real time. They'll be down in the description of this video below. All right, let's get started. So first, let's take a look at our ingredients. To start with, you're going to need 1 pound of peeled and deveined, if you like, medium-size raw shrimp. For those of you who are familiar with shrimp, you're going to look at these shrimp that I've got here and say, wait a minute, those are cooked. They're actually not. They're Argentinian pink shrimp, and they are raw. They're just naturally that color. It's what Costco had. Anyway, moving on, you're going to need 3 cups of chicken broth, 1/2 a teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of ground red pepper. If your grocery store's like mine and doesn't have ground red pepper, not red pepper flakes, ground red pepper, you can use cayenne pepper, which is what ground red pepper is. You're going to need 1 cup uncooked regular grits. You're going to need a half a cup or a stick of butter. You're going to need 3 eggs, which you're going to lightly beat. You're going to need 1 red bell pepper, diced. You're going to need 1 cup of chopped green onions. You're going to need 1 cup of breadcrumbs. You're going to need a half a cup of grated Parmesan cheese, and then you're going to need some minced garlic and the seafood seasoning of your choice. Old Bay is good. I like this Dano's seasoning that I found, but you're going to need that to season your shrimp before you put it in the casserole. Okay, so to start with, you're going to preheat your oven to 325 degrees. Next, in a bowl, you're going to want to add a teaspoon of your seafood seasoning and 1 to 2 cloves of minced garlic. Confession here, even though I had garlic cloves in the ingredients picture, I wimped out and added garlic, minced garlic from a jar. Anyway, you're going to want to mix that in your shrimp very well to coat. Next, in a large boiler, you're going to want to bring your broth and your salt and ground red pepper to a boil over medium-high heat. When that comes to a boil, you're going to whisk in your grits. Let that return to a boil. Then you're going to reduce your heat to medium-low and stir in your butter. Once the butter's melted, you're going to cover that and simmer, stirring it occasionally, for 10 minutes or until the liquid is absorbed. Once that liquid is absorbed, remove it from the heat. Now, once that's done, you're going to stir together your lightly beaten eggs with your red bell pepper, your green onions, your breadcrumbs, and your Parmesan cheese. Mix that together well. Next, take about a quarter, roughly, of your grits and add them to your egg mixture. That's to gently raise up the temperature of the eggs so they don't cook instantly when you put them in the hot grits. Next, fold that mixture back into the remaining grits, give that a little stir to mix, and then add your shrimp. I'm adding mine by hand instead of just dumping them in because there's some water that's collected in the bottom of that bowl and I don't want to make the whole mixture too watery. Now gently stir the shrimp in, mix it well, get that all folded in, make sure everything is covered and mixed nicely. And then we're going to pour that into a lightly greased 11x7 baking dish. Kind of smooth it out there as best you can. Then that goes into the oven at 325 degrees for 50 minutes to an hour, hour and 5 minutes, or until the mixture is set. You might see it start to brown just slightly on the top. That's kind of the point where you're getting to. And after an hour, mine took about an hour and 5 minutes, pull it out of your oven and let it stand for 10 minutes. That's important to let it finish setting up and to cool down a little bit. And ladies and gentlemen, here you are. It is as delicious as it is attractive, and it is great for an entree, it's great for lunch or brunch, it's even great as leftovers for breakfast. I can tell you that firsthand. This morning, actually. And ladies and gentlemen, there you go. It's a really easy prep to make that. The most difficult part for me was dicing the red pepper, and it is absolutely delicious. I hope you'll give it a try. If you do, please let me know how it goes down in the comments. Okay, let's talk a bit about Down the Dirt Road. As I mentioned at the beginning, I love that this story, which is at its heart, an opposites attract love story, but that it's got what I at least thought is this layer of enemies to more. But what if, as I mentioned before, the people don't know that they are supposed to be enemies or why they should be? Our story opens with Amara Jardine. She is one of three sisters, and her parents have recently died in an automobile accident about 6 months prior. Now, Amara and her family lived in Raspberry Ridge for most of her early years. When she was a teenager, the family moved to Chicago. They lived in a mansion on a bluff overlooking Lake Michigan, and they kept the mansion, intending to use it as a vacation home or maybe a place to celebrate holidays, but they never did. And now Amara and her two sisters are coming back to Raspberry Ridge to clean it out, go through their parents' belongings, and put the mansion up for sale. Now, when our story opens, Amara is a bit reticent to go in and start this process by herself because she finds her two sisters have been delayed. So she decides to wait a bit and in the short term, go for a walk. She decides to go down to the shore below the bluffs where they lived and go to this old fishing dock that she remembered as a child. She remembered there was an old fisherman there who entertained them with stories about fishing on the lake and his adventures on the lake. But she also remembers a warning from her mother that she is not allowed to speak to a boy who lives down there or his family, Hobert Gilcrest. Well, Amara goes down to the dock and, well, rather than tell any more, let me read to you some of the opening chapter of Down the Dirt Road. I hope you like it and you're interested in coming back for the full thing. And if you are, then you know you'll have to come back this Friday for the full release here on Say with Jay. Deciding that she could put off going into the house for a little bit longer, she stood and walked back down the steps. She could go into the town of Raspberry Ridge. Fran's store was still there, and she heard that someone was thinking about putting a restaurant in. One of her sisters had told her that. Probably Murdy. She was the one who kept track of everything and was always on top of it all. Amara walked down through the fields behind their mansion to the trail that met the dirt road that went down to the beach. There were a couple of old fishing docks there, and her siblings and she had hung out there a good bit when they were younger, although they hadn't been allowed to talk to the Gilcrest boy. She wasn't even sure where he lived, down there somewhere, but their mother had forbidden them to speak to him, or his family. Which wasn't hard, since she never saw him. The area was poor and run down and difficult, though not impossible, to get to except by boat. Still, Barry Klein had his fishing boat down at the docks and scraped out a living from it somehow. She thought he lived on his boat, if she remembered correctly. She spent hours down there, watching him mend his nets, listening to the stories of storms on the lake, and more stories from back when he worked on a freighter on Lake Superior. Those were some of the happiest memories of her childhood, and it was no wonder that her feet automatically took her in that direction. She went down the trail, which turned into a dirt road. It didn't look well used, but looked a little bigger than she remembered from childhood. It was longer, too, or she was just not used to walking, since she didn't remember it taking this long. She was active at the gym, going 3 or 4 times a week, but maybe she needed to work on her legs more. The lake breeze ruffled the grasses and lifted her hair off her shoulders, lifting her burdens as well, it seemed like. She had 6 weeks off, 6 whole weeks where she didn't have to worry about her job or coworkers or what time she got up or when she went to bed at all. She couldn't believe how freeing that felt, although she was tempted to call the office and check in. After all, she worked hard to get where she was, and she didn't want to go backward by taking an entire 6 weeks off. She never took days off, but her office hadn't been surprised. Since her parents died, they knew that she would be cleaning out the mansion in Raspberry Ridge. She talked about it a good bit around the water cooler. She hadn't needed to take time off when they were cleaning out the condo, since she'd done it on the evenings and weekends, although she'd always taken work with her and tried to work and clean at the same time. It irritated her sisters. She closed her eyes, lifting her head and allowing the breeze to push her hair back off her shoulders, opening her eyes and allowing her gaze to fall on the pristine blue waters of the lake. It was unbelievable how big they were, how massive, how they changed weather patterns because of their immense size, and yet she felt like she knew them intimately, at least Lake Michigan. It seemed different up here than it did down near Chicago, although she enjoyed walking along the lake there too. It just wasn't the same, wasn't this wild, wasn't as fresh, clean, pure. Maybe she was just romanticizing it, since the lake held the memories of her childhood, back when she was young and innocent and knew exactly what she wanted out of life, and her moral compass pointed due north all the time. She finally reached the beach area and the docks that she remembered. It actually looked like someone had been fixing them up, the way someone had widened the road. Interesting. It would be nice if there was a little fishing industry going on in Raspberry Ridge. It would be good for the local economy, and good for her pocketbook if she could buy fish from her hometown. That would be neat. Feeling lighter and almost happy, she smiled when she saw what looked like Barry Klein's boat. Someone had repainted it or refinished it or whatever someone did to a boat, and it looked a lot less dingy than it did in her memories. As she watched, someone came out from below the deck, walking up through the hatch and closing it behind him. Not Barry. This was a younger man, tall and lithe, with the brown skin and ropey muscles that came from working on a boat day in and day out. If Barry had a son, she didn't know about him, but she looked a little closer and saw that the boat was named the Barry Princess, which was the name of Barry's boat. The man spied her as she walked down the dock, shielding her face from the sun as she looked up at him. "This is Barry Klein's boat?" she asked, although she knew she probably should have introduced herself first. "Used to be," the man said easily, coiling up a rope while he spoke. "Interesting. I used to spend so much time down here, listening to his stories, watching him mend his nets and check his ropes. He would always tell me how important it was for a sailor to have good ropes." "And to tie good knots," the man added, and she smiled. "You knew him too?" She didn't have to say anything more. Barry always said good ropes and good knots. "I do." The way he said it made her tilt her head to the side. "Is he still around?" The man nodded. "I bought his boat, but he still hangs around some, although he's older than the rest of us and slower." He lifted his shoulder. "Sometimes he goes out with me, although not as often as he used to." As he used to. It sounded like the man had owned the boat for a while. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.